In this video, I'm going to be going over a beautiful Bible manuscript from the mid-13th century. These are pretty common for Bible collectors, but there's a really unique aspect about this particular manuscript. So you want to watch a full video to see what exactly this manuscript looks like, and also enjoy a dramatized story of events that took place during the time this particular manuscript was produced. It's the summer of 1249. The air in Egypt is heavy with dust and smoke. On the banks of the Nile, a French king, barely 30 years old, kneels in the sand. His armor is battered, his men are weary, but his voice is steady as he prays aloud. This is Louis IX, the man who would become Saint Louis, the king who embodied the very soul of medieval knighthood. Louis had not grown up as an ordinary monarch. Crowned at just 12 years old, after his father's death, he was raised to the crucible of faith by his mother, Blanche of Castile. She told him as a boy, "I would rather see you dead at my feet than stained with a mortal sin." Those words shaped him. Unlike so many kings before him, Louis would not be remembered for his cruelty or for endless ambition. He would rather be remembered for justice, mercy, and for living as the ideal Christian knight. In 1248, Louis took the cross. Thousands of French knights followed him eastward, bound for Egypt, the heart of Muslim power. The goal was bold: capture Cairo and use it as a gateway to retake Jerusalem. At first, victory seemed within reach. The French army seized the city of Dalmatia almost without a fight. Chroniclers say Louis strode ashore with a golden oriflamme held high, shining like a beacon. His knights cheered, believing God's favor was with them. But triumph turned to disaster. As the army marched south, disease and hunger cut through the ranks. Then, at the fortress of Mansoura, the French knights charged across the Nile, only to find themselves trapped in narrow streets and surrounded. The battle was chaos. Horses screamed, steel clashed, and blood ran in the alleys. Yet amid the panic, Louis refused to flee. He fought hand in hand, sword in one hand, shield in the other, until he was dragged down and captured. The King of France, now a prisoner of war. In chains, Louis's true character shone brighter than any battlefield glory. Instead of bargaining for his freedom, he prayed with his men, cared for the sick, and endured captivity with a calm that astonished even the Muslim captors. When his release was finally negotiated, he stayed behind to make sure every one of his soldiers was freed, even those of the lowest rank. For Louis, being a knight meant more than triumph. It meant loyalty, sacrifice, and honor. Louis would return to France and later embark on another crusade. But his true legacy was not conquest, it was character. He reformed laws to protect the poor, personally heard petitions from commoners under an oak tree at Vincennes, and lived as humbly as a monk, even while wearing a crown. The church would canonize him as Saint Louis, the only French king ever to be declared a saint. To this day, he remains a shining image of what a medieval world believed a knight should be: courageous in battle, unwavering in faith, and merciful in power. When we imagine the clash of steel and the glow of Crusader banners, we should remember Louis IX. Not just for the wars he fought, but for the way he lived. A king who became the very definition of the Christian knight. So as always, that was a fascinating and interesting story, but of course there were some embellishments throughout to make it a little bit more entertaining and interesting, but it still holds true to what we understand from a historical perspective about that character. But it's a really interesting item that we have in my collection today. Now, I did just sell this one. It'll be shipped out and probably in the owner's hand by the time this video comes out, but I wanted to do a quick video on it as it is a very special and unique item, one that I now no longer have because I sold it to someone else. But it is nonetheless a beautiful manuscript, and it is this large, what's called folio manuscript here. Again, this is from the mid-13th century. But in the early 1200s, Paris was the beating heart of the Christian world. It wasn't just the home of famous cathedrals like Notre Dame. It was also the center of the University of Paris, where thousands of students, scholars, and theologians came to study scripture and theology. So there was a massive need and desire or importance for having multiple Bibles. Now, this is a large Bible, as I mentioned, a folio, but they weren't always this size. Typically, a Bible of this size would have been used maybe in the classroom or in a church, or multiple people viewing this manuscript, because it would be very expensive to produce and quite time-consuming. I'll mention that a little bit later. But a common-sized Bible would be somewhere around this size. This one's actually the smallest that I've seen for a Parisian Bible or Paris Bible. Those are, of course, manuscripts, Bibles produced in Paris, France. This is a really beautiful little manuscript from the same time period. You can see it's extremely small compared to this larger folio one, and this particular one has a beautiful and ornate initial on it. I'll be doing a longer video on this particular manuscript, explaining a little bit more about that initial and more of its history. So stay tuned and subscribe, of course, for that video when I release it. But the demand for Bibles was, of course, enormous, as I mentioned, but unlike the giant lectern Bibles of earlier centuries, scholars needed something more portable, compact, and uniform, like that smaller one that I showed you. But the leaf is instantly recognizable as a 13th century manuscript, at least for people in my sphere in the world of Bible collecting. If you've done it for any amount of times, you'll look at something like this and know almost immediately, oh yeah, that's a Parisian Bible. You can tell by the format and the style. What it makes a little bit difficult is Bibles like this were also produced in England, so it might be a little bit more challenging to narrow down the area, but Paris was the hub. It was a central point where everyone would go to get these Bibles, and these Bibles were being produced en masse during that time period. But notice how the columns are perfectly balanced. The spacing is precise, and the margins are filled with tiny flourished initials in red and blue ink. This is very common and very indicative of manuscripts from especially the 13th century. We see it even earlier and then later, but these beautiful red and blue illuminations or rubrications, even with the red slashes throughout. This one doesn't actually have the rubrications, but it does have these nice initials throughout it, making it a beautiful and very common type of style for these manuscripts. But these decorations weren't just artistic. They helped readers find their place in the text, almost like medieval hyperlinks. It was able to find your way through the text, navigating it with these different features and elements, dividing the chapters and the different portions of the manuscript, even these little scribal notes that are on the side. Sometimes you see some interesting ones where there's actual scribal errors. Those are always fascinating and really cool to look at. What makes this particular leaf so fascinating? Well, most Bibles like this are not as compact or have as many lines of text. This particular one is a 63-line Bible, making it far more unique and valuable and rare as a collector. I've been collecting for years now, and I've had many, many Parisian Bibles, both in folio form and in the smaller format, and I have never had one that has those 63 lines of text on it. So having this demonstrates that it might have been produced for a more wealthy patron, someone who maybe put a lot of money into it or a lot of time into it. But this Bible represents a turning point in the history of Bible production. Before the Paris Bible, scripture existed in all sorts of different forms, orders, and formats. After the Paris Bible, the layout became standardized. The order of books, the division into modern chapters, and even the way reference tools were designed. And the legacy still lives with us today. Our modern Bibles are more or less formed after these types of styles. The double columns, which isn't unique to the 13th century. I have many Bibles from the 12th century, even 11th century, some even back to the 10th century. And you have two different columns of text. So it's not uncommon to see that, but the style and the chapter divisions is very unique and interesting. Now, of course, this predates verse divisions, so there are no verses on this. It's just the text with the chapter divisions, and the chapters do vary a bit from what we have in our modern Bibles, but still pretty close, and it makes it a lot easier to determine what passage the particular leaf is. Since it's in Latin, it is a bit more challenging to read. So a really fascinating piece. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, if you find this type of content interesting, please subscribe, help support the channel. A lot of really interesting and unique content in this channel. I cover a wide range of history, so be sure to check out my other long-form videos where I talk about different historical settings and aspects of the Bible. Of course, stick around for those close-up shots, and I'll see you guys in the next video.